Hello, and welcome to City Parks Alliance's Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act webinar, where we will explore 3 federal programs that could potentially provide funding for your city park projects. I'm Julie Waterman, and I'm the Advocacy Director at City Parks Alliance. I'll be moderating today's discussion. On behalf of City Parks Alliance, we'd like to thank the Speedwell Foundation for its support for our Resilience and Recovery webinar series. For those of you who are new to City Parks Alliance, we are the only independent nationwide membership organization solely dedicated to urban parks. We are a broad-based network of leaders from public agencies, nonprofits, design and planning firms, community-based organizations, elected officials, and others focusing on the intersection between parks and other critical urban infrastructure to build equitable and healthy cities. Our vision is that everyone in urban America will have access to the benefits of parks, recreational opportunities, and green spaces. Urban park systems in cities of all sizes are faced with a variety of funding challenges, from paying for daily maintenance and operations, to funding capital projects and improvements in historically underinvested communities, to paying for infrastructure upgrades to address climate impacts. There are a lot of federal funding programs out there, and City Parks Alliance helps cities decipher which of these programs might be the best fit for your city and its needs. If you want to find out more information about federal and state funding programs, check out our Equitable Funding Hub located on our cityparksalliance.org website. Today, we will focus on 3 programs that were included in the recently passed Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. The new Safeguarding Tomorrow Through Ongoing Risk Mitigation, or the STORM Act, the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, also known as SRF, and the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities Program, also known as BRIC. Our speakers will explain how funding through these programs might be applied to your urban park projects. I am pleased to welcome our speakers. Mayor Jim Strickland with the City of Memphis, Tennessee, Alison Souders, Financial Analyst with the Environmental Protection Agency, and Camille Crain, Acting Deputy Division Director at FEMA. We will hear all of our speaker presentations before moving into the Q&A. To ensure we can respond to everyone as questions or technical difficulties arise, please follow these tips. To ask a question, click the questions icon on your screen. Type the question in the box and click send. Feel free to send questions throughout the presentation. Just know that we will be holding them until the end. If you experience a technical problem during the presentation, please type it in the question box and send it to us. If you missed something, don't worry. Links to the webinar recording, presentations, and related resources will be emailed to all registrants. Let's begin with Mayor Strickland, who will be talking about the Safeguarding Tomorrow Through Ongoing Risk Mitigation, or STORM Act. Mayor Strickland, I hand it off to you.
Thank you very much, Julie. It's an honor to be here, not only as Mayor of Memphis, but I'm also the co-chair of the Mississippi Rivers Cities and Towns Initiative, which is MRCTI, and we are an association comprised of 101 mayors up and down the 10-state Mississippi River corridor. Now, parks are critical pieces of infrastructure in Memphis and in every city around the country. The value of parks to our communities cannot be overstated. They improve the quality of life, increase property values, provide needed recreation. And importantly, they can work to protect our cities from disasters. Parks can be an integral part of our city's stormwater management, climate mitigation, water quality, and economic development. In Memphis, we are working to create additional parkland along the Wolf River to act as a flooding buffer zone for several local communities. Additionally, the Mississippi waterfront in Memphis is vast, extending from the border of Mississippi and Tennessee to just south of the Lucy-Hatchie River. This core 6-mile stretch of waterfront area is occupied by several parks essential to life in Memphis, including Tom Lee Park. This parkland not only acts as the aesthetic showcase of our city, but they also provide recreational activities, absorb floodwater, increase our water security, and invite outdoor recreation and the tourism economy. Parks and other forms of natural infrastructure can be our first line of defense from natural disasters, which is exactly what we mayors had in mind when we worked to develop the Resilience Revolving Loan Fund, or the STORM Act. The STORM Act, which stands for Safeguarding Tomorrow Through Ongoing Risk Mitigation. That act was signed into law just over a year ago and was funded for 5 years in the infrastructure package. The STORM Act creates a new Resilience Revolving Loan Fund program modeled after similar water programs such as the Clean Water Act and the Drinking Water State Revolving Funds. And we believe it will spur investment ahead of future disasters. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, will accept applications from states for a federally financed capitalization grant for cities and counties to make loans at an interest rate of not more than 1.25%. This new state-managed revolving loan fund will be eligible for projects intended to protect against wildfires, earthquakes, flooding, storm surges, chemical spills, seepage resulting from chemical spills, floods, and any other event deemed catastrophic by FEMA. These low interest funds will allow cities and states to repay the loan with savings from mitigation or disaster avoidance projects. It also gives states and localities the flexibility to respond to ongoing disasters without paying high interest rates, so they can invest in their communities, cutting the red tape of having to wait on the federal government for additional grants year after year. Further, because the Resilience Revolving Loan Fund is a loan program and not a grant, the intention is to make the program much more accessible and much less of an administration lift than other traditional FEMA programs. Grant programs under hazard mitigation can be difficult for medium and smaller communities to secure. FEMA is in the process now of assembling guidance around the STORM Act, and we hope that that process will be complete in a few months. MRCTI, our group of mayors, has been in close contact with FEMA to ensure the priorities of the Resilience Revolving Loan Fund, make sure it matches our needs, especially when it comes to the flexible spending that we need, which includes using the money on assets like parks. Priority projects from states to receive a loan include projects increasing resilience of natural and built infrastructure, projects involving a partnership between 2 or more states, projects that take into account regional impacts of multiple hazards, including drought in river basins, river corridors, micro watersheds, and macro watersheds, projects that implicate the resilience of major economic sectors or critical natural infrastructure, including ports and global commodity supply chain assets. MRCTI also worked hard to ensure the STORM Act made it into the final version of the bipartisan infrastructure package, funding this program at $100 million a year for 5 years. It is truly our hope that the fund can be accessible by both large and small communities alike, and that our vast water infrastructure assets, such as parks, can qualify for resiliency funding. The STORM Act lists a few items to consider when applying, including an assessment, description, the proposal, and congruence to a hazard mitigation plan. But there is little detail so as to keep these demands manageable and rather lighter than they may otherwise be pursuant to traditional FEMA grant programs. A key takeaway here is that the Storm Act is the first of its kind at a national level for the United States. However, state revolving loan funds for wastewater and drinking water have been around for 30 years, so there is some precedent to follow. But because the Mississippi River Valley has sustained nearly $210 billion in actual losses due to disasters since 2005, resiliency, largely achieved through natural infrastructure deployment and restoration, is a solution our cities along the Mississippi are convinced is necessary. The mayors of MRCTI would certainly consider parks as an allowable expense to be supported by a loan from the Resilience Revolving Loan Fund. However, it will be ultimately up to FEMA how they craft the guidance. There are a couple things that the members of the Park Alliance can do to better ensure parks be accepted as a qualified use. One, work with your state to ensure the state legislature either passes a Resilience Revolving Loan Enabling Act or the governor adopt a Resiliency Revolving Loan Enabling Policy that explicitly states that parks are accepted as natural infrastructure assets. Two, send a letter to FEMA urging their Storm Act guidance ensure parks are allowed as a permissible resilience expense under the new program. Three, the Parks Alliance can also support our letter to FEMA outlining all of these details that we crafted with state legislators from the Mississippi River Corridor. In September 2021, our mayors launched the City-State Task Force to allow mayors and state legislators to work together on critical issues where there is strong city-state policy congruence, and the state and the Storm Act was our first order of business. One last point to wrap all this up. Section 205(d)(3) of the Storm Act is likely one of the most crucial sections of the legislation because it prioritizes for projects that also protect natural infrastructure with additional credence given to drinking water infrastructure. Thus, taken in its entirety, this section can be interpreted broadly to include a myriad of projects, such as those that include parks, especially if the parks are an integral part of the city's water management plan, disaster mitigation plan, climate resilience plan, and/or low impact development strategy to ensure essential natural infrastructure, such as fresh water sources, are made more resilient. Parks are not just natural infrastructure themselves. They also protect larger natural assets such as rivers by capturing runoff, limiting nutrient loading, and creating natural flood buffers. Thank you to the City Parks Alliance for having me today and having me as a member of your Mayors for Parks group. Parks are a vital part of our community, and I'm proud to support parks for their many benefits to Memphis and the Mississippi River corridor. I'll try to remain as long as I can today, but if there are any technical questions at the end of this panel, Julie, our Executive Director, Colin Wellenkamp, and our Government Relations Director, Brant Thorington, are here to assist. Thank you, Julie.
Great. Thank you, Mayor Strickland. As cities develop plans for their park projects, it is good to know that the Storm Act can be considered as one tool to help with their funding needs, a tool that might be a little less of a heavy lift than some of the other federal programs. And we will definitely work with FEMA as they develop the guidelines. Now let's hear from Camille Crain about the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities Program, or BRIC, and how it can apply to parks. Camille, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Julie. And if I could just do a show check to make sure you can see my slides.
Yes.
Great. Hello, everyone. My name is Camille Crain, and as Julie said, I am currently the Acting Deputy Division Director for the Hazard Mitigation Assistance Division inside of mitigation at FEMA headquarters. When I'm not on this detail, which I'm currently on as acting, I actually am the BRIC, Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities Program Manager for FEMA. And in the next few minutes, I'm going to give you a very very quick overview of the programs and mitigation programs that FEMA has, along with a couple of links where you can find more information. So without any further ado, let's get started. So as we talk about not just, I'm going to talk a lot about BRIC since that's the program I know most about in this next few minutes, but I wanted to give you the landscape of all the mitigation grant programs that FEMA currently manages. We have 3 that are really tied to the disaster cycle. So after those presidentially declared disasters, that includes 406 mitigation, which is actually run out of our recovery division, our recovery section of FEMA. And that's tied to public assistance. The 2 programs that we have inside of hazard mitigation assistance are our hazard mitigation grant program and our hazard mitigation grant program post-fire that comes with fire management assistant grants. On the flip side, we have what we call our annual programs. So these are not tied directly to a disaster. They come out annually through a notice of funding opportunity. And that includes our flood mitigation assistance or FMA program, as well as our building resilient infrastructure and communities BRIC program that I'm going to talk a lot more about. PDM, which you'll also see on the slide, is our pre-disaster mitigation. That's the program that actually ran from about 2003 through 2019 that BRIC replaced. And of course, you just heard Mayor Strickland talk about the Storm Act. While it's not a grant program, it's going to be our first revolving loan program. That's going to be run out of the Hazard Mitigation Assistance Division as well. So as I move to a little bit about, what happened basically over this fall, with a lot of additional funding being put into mitigation, which is a 20+ year mitigator I'm super excited about. So looking at the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act and its increase, as the mayor said, it was signed into law mid-November. It provided about $6.8 billion, I should say, in funding to FEMA in the area specifically of climate resilience. About $5 billion of that 6.8 is inside of the division that I currently work in, which is hazard mitigation assistance. So for the BRIC program, it gave about $200 million a year as a plus up, basically, because the BRIC is funded through post-disaster activity. So I said it was an annual cycle, but we actually get our money from disaster activity. 6% of disaster costs go into a BRIC piggy bank, I like to call it, that we break open once a year and scoop money out of and put into a program. IIJA builds up that piggy banks with an extra $200 million. Our flood mitigation assistance program got a plus up of $3.5 billion over 5 years. That's $700 million a year, which is significant for that program that only had about $160 million or $175 million a year. So now it has an extra $700 million a year. The Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, HMGP, you don't see actually anything in IIJA for it, but one thing that we got in August was $3.46 billion into that program by adding the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program to all the COVID disasters, which means that for the first time, I think in forever, every single state territory now has an open pocket or pot of Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. And that $3.46 billion is basically 22% of all the funding that's ever been available for the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, so a huge investment there. So going into BRIC, one thing I always like to talk about, and I think this really will relate to the Storm Act as well, you heard the mayor talk about a lot of the specifics of storm that are known through the actual law that was passed itself about kind of those Jersey barriers and what the program is or is not. But when we took BRIC, BRIC was a program we got through the Disaster Recovery Reform Act of 2018. We took a significant amount of time, almost 2 years, putting out that program, and that was done with a lot of intention. Designing a program is something you want to be very thoughtful for, and you want to be very inclusive in doing. And so one of the things we did with BRIC is we did a heavy stakeholder engagement that led to more than 5,000 non-attributable individual comments and more than 70 agency letters. With that, we formed what were the guiding principles of the BRIC program. And so as you see them there, you'll see to support communities' capacity and capability building, to encourage and enable innovation, to promote partnerships, to enable large infrastructure projects, to maintain flexibility. We wanted to be able, we are BRIC, a program that is built on continuous improvement. So to do that, we had to create a lot of flexibility in our design so we could change from year to year or learn from year to year. And then we also wanted to provide consistency as we're part of that suite of programs. BRIC has kind of an overarching that we are there to, our mission is to reduce disaster suffering for the built environment, for people and property. And at the same time, we see being able to support communities and capacity building so they can do that themselves as well. As I move to what our priorities are for the BRIC program for FY21, I do need to acknowledge we are about a week and a half away from the application deadline for FY21. So if you haven't started working on your application yet, or you haven't got it submitted yet, it's probably too late for this cycle. But I always like to tell people BRIC is not a one-year program. We have a program every year, and we know thoughtful projects with the need to build partnerships and coalitions and putting these together take time. So it's never too early to start thinking about the next year's submissions. But for your awareness, our priorities for funding for this year, FY21, including mitigating the risk to public infrastructure, incentivizing resilient investments that benefit disadvantaged communities, mitigating the risk to one or more of the community's lifelines or those critical facilities inside of a community, incorporating nature-based solutions, enhancing climate resilience and adaptation, and incentivizing the adoption and enforcement of modern building codes. And of course, we highly prioritize projects that mitigate multiple of these priorities. So as I talked a little bit about before, that graphic that's on your left is just a demonstration of how a disaster happens. 180 days after that, we take 6% of the estimates that goes into the BRIC piggy bank. For this year, for FY21, with the application period that's going to end here in about a week and a half, we had $1 billion available. 56 million of that, roughly, goes out as state and territory allocations. So all 50 states, the 5 U.S. territories and the District of Columbia have $1 million each that they can use to apply to any eligible activity. And so that's at their discretion how they use those funds. On top of that, federally recognized tribal governments are also our applicants along with state and territories. So because the federally recognized tribes do not get part of the allocation, we set aside $25 million for them to access without having to compete. And then the balance of the funds, so this year roughly around $919 million, are going to be put into a national competition for mitigation projects. I wanted to give you kind of a look at 2 different examples that came out of last year. FY20 was our first year of BRIC. And from that, we made selections last summer for our program value last year was $500 million. So we doubled it this year to $1 billion. So with the $500 million that we had last year, we made roughly 406 selections. 22 of those came out of our national competition, which was around $400 million last year. It's at $900 million this year. We have on our website, which the email address or website link will be at the end of this presentation. We have written stories about those 22 different projects. A couple of those I pulled out for a brief little show today because they have parks as part of kind of the end result of the project. The first one that you see up here right now is in the Lumberton, North Carolina. It's called the Lumberton Loop. And so the idea is that there are some property acquisitions that will happen as part of this project for flood-prone property. And then by making those acquisitions, they can basically convert about 100 different parcels that most of them already have been bought in the past and are currently used as open space. But basically, you're going to be able to create an 800-acre trail system. This will also have restored wetlands, different stream restoration, but all kinds of really dynamic nature-based flooding protection for surrounding property and the surrounding community, while also offering a lot of recreational for the community, especially a large part of disadvantaged. It's a project that involves a lot of different partnerships and hopefully will do a lot of enhancements both for risk reduction as well as community wellness. As we go to a second example, this one's in another one of the FY20 BRIC selections. This is in Washington, D.C., and it's called the Blue-Green Stormwater Flood Mitigation, happening in southwest area of Washington, D.C. And basically it is using natural features as well as underground storage to do flood reduction that is in a disadvantaged area that also protects critical facilities like police and fire, and uses and creates park to both as part of the flood reduction for both the overground and underground. So one other piece I wanted to share with you before I close out for today is we do use, so if you're interested in future years, most likely, in applying for the BRIC program, the entities that can apply directly to FEMA are states, tribes, and territories, and those tribes have to be federally recognized. The sub-applicants, or those folks that can apply to those applicants, include communities as well as other state agencies, other tribal agencies. Individuals cannot apply directly, but they can work with the community as well as private industry and academia. When you're putting those applications together, we use FEMA Grant Outcomes, which is our new grant web-based grant portal. So I want to make sure you have that information because you have to sign up for an account. You'd want to do all that ahead of time as well. If you are working on an application right now for awareness, our application period for this cycle opened on September 30th of 2021. It closes, like I said, in just a little bit over a week, 3 p.m. Eastern time on January 28th. And we ask that actually you try to put those in a couple days earlier, because if you're going to have any technical issues in the system, we need to know about those 48 hours in advance. So that is 3 p.m. Eastern time on January 26th. And then just a last thank you so much for having me today. It was exciting to come and talk to you all about the BRIC program very briefly, as well as I enjoyed really hearing about Mayor Strickland talk about the Storm Act. And let me leave you with the BRIC website. So it's easy enough, FEMA.gov/BRIC. And then from there as well, you could find out about our other grant programs. So Julie, I will turn it back to you.
Great. Thanks, Camille. Yeah, I love the examples at the end that you gave of the projects in Lumberton, North Carolina, and Southwest DC. Those examples just really help bring to life about how the BRIC program can be used for park projects. So thank you. And now we're going to turn to Alison Souders, and she's going to talk about the Clean Water State Revolving Fund and how it can be used for park projects. And Alison, I'm going to hand the mic off to you now.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Alison Souders. I work for the Clean Water State Revolving Fund in Washington, D.C. at EPA headquarters, also known as the CWSRF or SRF. So I'll just give a quick overview of the fund. So what is the CWSRF? We are, very simply put, an environmental bank that provides low-cost source of funding for water quality infrastructure projects. So the fund is administered by the EPA and state agencies. Each year, EPA awards a capitalization grant to each state and Puerto Rico. Each state provides 20% match, and those funds are used to make low interest loans and other types of financial assistance to eligible recipients to make for projects that improve water quality. Principal repayments and interest earnings are then recycled back into the SRF, the state revolving fund, to finance new projects, allowing the fund to revolve over time. Each state has their own Clean Water State Revolving Fund. It might go by different names, so you apply directly with your state Clean Water Revolving Program. And I have a list here on the slide at the bottom that's on our website of each of those state programs for you to be able to find yours. So The SRFs, like I mentioned, are state implemented and operated. They have a wide range of flexibility to target resources to their priority and needs. At the very base, we are a loan program. We provide low interest loans from zero to market rate, up to 30 years or the useful life of the project. For 2020, the average rate for a Clean Water State Revolving Fund loan across the states in Puerto Rico was 1.2% compared to the market rate at 2.7%. Another great savings offered by the CWSRF is called additional subsidies or additional subsidization, but basically just a pot of money that is available in each state in the form of loan forgiveness or grants. It ultimately reduces or eliminates the amount that needs to be repaid, and repayment starts 1 year after project completion. So that gives a little bit of time for projects to kind of get going. So in terms of assistance options, like I mentioned, it's generally below market interest rate loans. We can buy or refinance local debt, guarantee SRF debt obligations, guarantee loans of sub-state revolving funds, and additional subsidization, again, which is a grant-like vehicle that can be mixed with the loan to make repayment less. So there are many financial benefits to the assistance options that we provide. Though we're a loan program, like I mentioned, the additional subsidies can actually act like a grant. The loans can cover up to 100% of project cost. We don't require a match from the recipient, from the assistance recipient. It's a loan program, not a grant. You can use our loans to provide match for grants that support eligible projects. Many states we've seen folks borrow to provide match for USDA or other types of grants. And CWSRF financing is often used to co-finance projects with USDA and or private state funds. So as a loan program, the potential CWSRF borrowers need to identify a dedicated repayment source when you're coming in for the loan, but the repayment source does not need to come from the project itself. Generally, clean water borrowers are oftentimes municipalities or utilities that use their user rates to repay their loans, but other borrowers like nonprofits have been able to identify some creative revenue streams to use for repayment. And I'll give some examples later from some parks projects that used park fees to repay their loans, and some of the others examples are listed on the screen. State programs will work with you if this is an issue as well. There's other financing options. So this is really a state specific program. So to understand your options, you would contact your specific state. So who is eligible? Again, states determine the eligible borrowers and are responsible for selecting and funding the projects. So communities, municipalities are eligible entities in each state. Some states fund private organizations. Many have started to fund nonprofits, NGOs. Sorry, I'm confused on my screen here. Oops. Again, it's a state by state case, but we've seen a lot of departments of Parks and Recs, state agencies, local organizations, citizens groups coming in. We have a vast array of different examples. So for the Clean Water SRF, our base program has been around, like Mayor Strickland mentioned, for over 30 years, funding this type of work, funding water quality improvement work. Non-point source updates have been available for funding since the beginning of the program, but just 2021, we're seeing a giant increase of funds with the bipartisan infrastructure law and American Rescue Plan Act money coming. So this is different than the EJA, but the bill is actually going to boost the financial power of the Clean Water SRFs by $11 billion over 5 years that's already been appropriated. So on top of around $2 billion each year that goes out, another 2 or so will go out for the next 5 years with the same eligibilities in place, still able to fund the same type of projects, just more money available that states are going to be able to use for this. And a great part of the bill funding is that 49% of that 11 billion will need to go out as the additional subsidization that reduces the burden for repayment of the borrowers. And it's an opportunity for states to target communities with environmental justice concerns, resiliency issues, or other priorities. So now what can actually be funded with the Clean Water State Revolving Fund? We have 12 project eligibilities. They include everything listed here on the screen. What's probably relevant for most folks on the call today, we can fund non-point source pollution reduction efforts. We can do septics, stormwater management, green infrastructure, water reuse. We've seen a lot of, like, for instance, in the picture here, it was a stream daylighting in Squalicum, Washington. So the next slide actually gives a few of the general categories that we see being funded that I thought would be pertinent today, but I provided a link to our list of eligibilities here at the bottom. It's basically projects that are going to be providing a water quality benefit. So a lot of times at parks, we see green infrastructure, site cleanup and conversion to parks, habitat restoration. A lot of states will do conservation easements, and sometimes those are then made available for public use. So it does depend on the state, but these are the types of project categories available for financing. Specifically for green infrastructure, assistance has been provided by programs to interested communities with funding to incorporate green infrastructure into parks. Just general list here of things that we've seen. I'll give some examples later: permeable pavement, constructed wetlands, green roofs. With this, you can include like energy efficiency and savings and other things in your projects. So here are a few really cool examples. This is a project in Delaware. Their Clean Water State Revolving Fund is housed in their Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Control. So if you search Delaware CWSRF, you might not find it, but if you go to our website, there's a list where all of the water quality financing administrations are in each state. So this example was at Cape Henlopen State Park. They, the Delaware Division of Parks and Recs, received a $784,000 loan at their busiest state park. They were having problems with cracked sewer pipes that were, so they did a pipe relining project with the money from Clean Water State Revolving Fund to fix the pipes. The plant now processes much less water per month because it's not flowing out of the cracks to their wastewater treatment center. It's around 74,000 gallons as compared to 1 million. So treatment costs have decreased dramatically, and they are using park entry fees to repay the loan. And then we have an example here of a city park in Georgia. The Clean Water SRF in Georgia is in the Environmental Finance Authority. So this was actually a $4 million loan to the city of Griffin. Their culvert was creating sinkholes throughout the park. So the CWSRF worked with the project to complete a trenchless technique so that they didn't have to move any of the monuments. They eliminated flooding issues and ultimately saved the city quite a bit of money by not have to moving the monuments. And they also placed a litter trap at the golf course. An important part of each of these projects is the coordination within the communities and the different organizations to get these done. So in this case, they coordinated with the city's public works departments and held public meetings throughout the process. We see that a lot with the park projects that come in involving the community. So what should be your next steps? If you're interested in financing for a water quality project in your park or creating a park out of this, I would contact your state CWSRF program. I have the link here that has the information for each state contact, or you can go ahead and contact our team at CWSRF@EPA.gov if that's easier, and we can direct you to the right contact for your state. It depends on the state for application periods, but a lot of them are probably coming up around now. So you can go ahead and email us or contact your state to have a discussion on the different financing options available to you. And we also have a newsletter that you could subscribe to. So thank you. And that's it. And I just had a few resources available here that are useful if you're not as familiar with the program, but always happy to answer questions. My email is available on the presentation too. So thank you.
Great. Thanks, Alison. We are seeing more and more examples of parks being used to address critical infrastructure, particularly stormwater management. And it's great to hear how the Clean Water State Revolving Fund can assist in this area. Each of these programs, there is a lot to digest if you are not actually working in the program, and they all come across as quite complicated. So I'm really glad that we have our experts here to answer the questions. So we are going to move into the audience Q&A. As Mayor Strickland stated, we have staff from the Mississippi Rivers and Towns Initiative to help address any questions regarding the Storm Act. So I'd like to welcome Brant Thorington and Colin Wellenkamp. And so I'm going to go right into the questions. Let's see, we have a question that, on the BRIC program. Do priorities change much from year to year for BRIC?
So we're only in the second year of BRIC. So I will say for the first year of BRIC, we had 4 priorities, and those were public infrastructure, community lifelines, nature-based solutions, and building codes. For the second year of BRIC, we kept those 4, we added 2, and that was in the area of equity, as BRIC has been chosen. If you're familiar with the Justice 40 effort from the White House, BRIC is one of the 21 federal programs, along with FMA. So we have 2 of the 21 federal programs that have been chosen to pilot the Justice 40 effort to drive at least 40% of our overall benefits to disadvantaged communities. So we added a disadvantaged communities priority, as well as a climate resilience. I don't foresee those going away in year 3. The FEMA, they both align with the administration. Also, the FEMA strategic plan that came out last month, the new one for 22 through 26. One of the goals is to help with climate resilience across the nation, and another is to have equity as a foundation of emergency management. So we are in line with the new FEMA strategic plan as well. So I would anticipate there's not going to be many priority changes for year 3 of BRIC. The NOFO, or Notice of Funding Opportunity, will come out around the August 2022 timeframe for year 3.
Great, thanks, Camille. Can nonprofits be sub-applicants to BRIC?
No, they cannot be direct, but we can absolutely work with them. This is why we have promoting partnership as one of the 6 guiding principles. Our current legislation does not allow for nonprofits to be directly a sub-applicant, but they could partner with another eligible sub-applicant to help them put together an application, and we have seen that happen.
So I think this is similar. Are any of these programs open to academic institutions to apply who are sponsoring projects in public parks, or does it have to be the municipality? And it sounds like the municipality, but they can go in and partner with them.
Right. If you look at, specifically for BRIC, I will say, if you look at the example I gave for Lumberton, with the Lumberton Loop, North Carolina, you'll see on that slide, there was a list of partners, and that included the University of North Carolina. I'm sorry, no, it didn't include North Carolina State. I know how the difference is, the universities, you shouldn't get confused.
Great.
I could just mention that it depends on the state, but universities would be eligible depending on the state for Clean Water State Revolving Fund.
Great, great. Let's see, at the time of application for the state revolving funds, will you know how much will be eligible for forgiveness, subsidy, or is that determined later within the project?
This is I feel terrible always saying it depends on the state. They will know how much they have available for the year and where it's going to go, and you can kind of work with them. And a lot of the states will just keep communication lines open throughout the whole application process through getting the deal made. So it does depend on the state, but you get an idea when you're first talking with the folks that you're working with for the loan terms.
Sounds like the very first thing everyone needs to do is contact their state representative.
Yes, exactly. Mm-hmm.
Camille, one of BRIC's guiding principles is community capacity building. Can you give an example of a project that helped to build the community's capacity?
Right. So we actually have 4 different project types, and I will say we just made, to remind, we made our first selections back in last summer, and we're just now starting to fund our first project. So none of our BRIC projects have actually gone to completion yet, but we have identified 4 different project types that we kind of put in the area of capacity and capability building activities. Those 4 different project types are mitigation planning. So whether it is the writing or creation, the update, because they have 5-year update cycles of mitigation plans, or incorporating other mitigation planning techniques. So maybe you're taking your mitigation plan, putting it into a comprehensive plan, for example. That's one, mitigation planning. The second one is project scoping. So maybe you know you have an issue, but you're not 100% sure what to do about it. So you're not ready to put in for a large construction project because you're not sure what the solution is yet. You can get a mitigation scoping grant to basically help you figure that out. It'll help you do the benefit cost analysis, do the engineering, do the environmental paperwork, do coalition or partnership building. So that is a second type of CNCB, which is our shorthand for capacity and capability building project type. Our third one is we fund partnerships. So we have partnerships as one of our guiding principles. We promote partnerships in our competition criteria for our competition. We now will fund that type of activity too. So whether that might be a community needs to do a gap analysis to understand where strategic partnerships would make sense, or needs to have forums to bring people together, we can help fund partnerships. And the fourth CNCB activity is building code work. As we have that as one of our priorities, and that is, if you read the legislation from the Disaster Recovery Reform Act of 2018, you'll see building codes throughout it. We can actually fund building code work. So that might be a community that wants to adopt a code, a community that wants to improve their code, maybe from 2018 to 2021 International Building Code, wants to help fund the enforcement of code, or wants to improve their BSEGS, Building Code Grading Effectiveness Schedule, rating.
Wow.
All of this is available on the BRIC website. So if you go to FEMA.gov, we have created a myriad, about 13 different what we call program support materials. And they are 4 to 7 pages a piece. And they talk about different key elements of the program, including each of those 4 project types, and are like our competition criteria. So we created what we hope are easily digestible reading bits to help you understand how the BRIC program works.
Great. Yeah. And again, to all of our folks listening in, we will be providing related materials to this webinar. And I'm seeing some questions. Can we show the links later? So that will all be coming post-webinar. So for all of our nonprofits out there, they're asking again about partnership. Who should they be partnering with to either with the SRF or with the BRIC program to access these funds and grant loan programs? I'll go with Alison first.
Yeah, you would call your state agency. There will be someone there that is the first point of contact that will kind of probably shuffle you through a few people with conversations and questions.
And for BRIC, it's the same for most of our hazard mitigation grant programs, I should say. There is a position in each state called a state hazard mitigation officer. They're called the SHMO, which is, I used to be one of those for the Commonwealth of Kentucky. It's the best title ever. But you want to contact your SHMO, which is usually in the emergency management office, so the state hazard mitigation officer. And they're the ones that are responsible for administering BRIC, usually the hazard mitigation, or definitely the hazard mitigation grant program, as well as most times FMA, Flood Mitigation Assistance Program.
Great. I have a question regarding the Clean Water SRF funding. Is there any new guidance EPA is providing to states on working with their municipalities to get these funds to the local level in an effective way?
Right now, everything is so crazy at headquarters, just with all this money that's coming in. So not right now. we will kind of like give direction to states, but we often don't give them guidance on how to use their funds other than what's in the regs and the requirements in that is attached to the funding. Like Camille was mentioning, like our priorities at EPA, we've seen a lot for resilience, communities with environmental justice concerns, and then again, each state has their own priorities, so they're able to target those.
Back to the state.
Back to the state.
Camille, can you talk about some of the best practices when applying to the BRIC program? I know that's kind of a very open-ended question, but for folks that are like, oh, what do I do? And just starting off.
Sure. I think
ask the same question to Alison that came in as well.
There's a couple of things I would heavily recommend. I was talking a little bit before about our program support material that are available on our website. If you're thinking about putting in for a construction project, which means you're most likely, so for reference, we have a state can submit, for example, as an applicant, an unlimited number of sub-applications. They can submit as many projects as they want. Each one of those can be valued up to $50 million a piece. So if you're looking at a project that is more than $1 million, for example, because that's their entire allocation, they're most likely going to put into the competition. There is competition criteria. It is a points system, and it is key to understand, to be successful in BRIC, to understand that point system. So we created program support material, one for the technical criteria, which is half the points, and one for what we call the qualitative criteria, which is half the points. I've had a regional administrator at FEMA hold them up and say, these are the keys to the test. If you think of BRIC as a test, these are your answer keys. And so I would say to be successful, what I've seen as a best practice in that first year of applications, you could read the applications that understood those criteria, and really the projects were very, as I like to say, bricky, like they spoke to those criteria, because those criteria are really coming from our priorities. So you'll see like points awarded for lifeline projects, nature-based projects, projects in places that have building codes, projects that are infrastructure, projects that help disadvantaged, projects that have climate elements, for example. But you really need to read those to be successful. It also, I would say, talk to your state hazard mitigation officer early, before the cycle opens. Understand their deadlines, because like as I showed you those FEMA deadlines, they're going to have their own internal deadlines, and sometimes those are way early in the cycle. And so you want to understand what those deadlines are.
That's great. Alison, before I just quick follow-up, Camille, just so folks are ready to contact their schmo, but are the cities the main applicant, or does the state determine who the eligible partners are? It's the city, then they come to schmo.
So the sub-applicants typically are cities, counties, parishes, but some local form of government. And then if you think of the state, they usually act as like an umbrella that all the sub-applications submitted by typically cities and counties submit to them.
Okay.
But they may, while there's, like for BRIC program, FEMA has a set of priorities, right? I showed them to your screen. The state may have priorities as well. And so you want to make, that's why it's, that SMO needs to be your best friend.
Great. Alison, I'll let you go, and you could probably be the last one. And Brant, I think the Storm Act is brand new, so you got off today. But we will be providing
a good program. It's very flexible, so look, keep an eye out for it. It'll be helpful in the future.
And I'm told it's a little bit less of a heavy lift in using it for smaller and mid-sized cities.
Yes, we actually, some of our mayors have applied for BRIC before, and it can be a tough process going through the states. They've had difficulties. So when this was, designed by Congress and with our input, we really tried to make it more flexible and a lot easier to apply for. And hopefully, that stays with it in FEMA. I have all the faith in the world they're going to do a great job implementing it.
Great. All right, Alison, you're going to be the last. Best practices, and then we're going to have to wrap this up.
Sure. So one thing that's really helpful if when you're really starting to think, hey, I think I want maybe some Clean Water State Revolving Fund money, is to go on the website. There's a link that has the link to each state website, or you can just email us and I'll get you in touch with someone. Each state has an intended use plan that they are required federally to come out with every year for their state revolving fund. And that will go over the types of assistance they provide, what they fund, who they fund, and then the projects. They start kind of compiling the projects that are coming in. So no matter what time of the year it is, I would say look at the intended use plan on the website and just contact someone at the state to even just let them know that you're thinking about coming to them for funding, because a lot of folks in the SRF programs also work with other financing programs for infrastructure in the states too, so they might have some other options for you. So just taking a look at the state website, the intended use plans, and getting in contact with someone either at headquarters and I can help you there, or we can get you in touch with someone at the state.
Great, thanks, Allison. I'm going to ask one more question at the very bottom. What is the minimum grant amount request for BRIC and the application matching requirement per application?
There is no minimum. No minimum. Maximum 50 million. And matching, our standard matching is 75% federal, 25% non-federal. We do have one difference. That is for what we call economically disadvantaged rural communities. An economically disadvantaged rural community is entitled to 90% federal, 10% non-federal. An economically disadvantaged rural community is a population of 3,000 or less. That's economically disadvantaged, meaning no more than 80% of the national per capita income.
Great. Okay. All right. Well, in the interest of time, that was our last question. I'd like to thank our speakers for joining us today and for sharing such excellent information and ideas about how funding sources from these 3 federal programs could be applied to urban park projects. And again, to learn more about our federal funding options, please visit our Equitable Funding Hub on our website. You can also visit the events tab at cityparksalliance.org for information about upcoming webinars. If you have additional questions, you can reach out to our speakers directly at the email shown on the screen, and also reach out to your state officer. And we would like to thank again the Speedwell Foundation for their support for the Resilience and Recovery webinar series. If you are interested in becoming a CPA member, please visit cityparksalliance.org/join for information about all of our great member benefits, including members only webinar programs. So now with this, within 2 days, you're going to receive an email with links to today's recording, the slide presentations, and related resources. And lastly, be sure to mark your calendars for City Parks Alliance's Greater and Greener Conference, taking place in person in Philadelphia, June 18 to 21, 2022. So this summer. Registration is going to open in February, but in the meantime, you can explore the conference tracks and get the latest information at greatergreener.org. So again, many thanks to our presenters and our attendees for joining us today. Please take a minute to fill out the short evaluation that will pop up after the session concludes. And to everyone, keep up the great work that you're doing for your communities and for our nation's city parks. So, thank you.
Thanks, Julie. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.